a brief disclaimer before we start tonight's show. Before we start tonight's program, this is a reminder that this episode will address various topics we have discussed before, especially by way of mental health. These may be sensitive to some of our viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. We remind you to please consult your doctor, your mental health professional, your outreach group, your sponsor or specialist before adopting any change to your dietary, physical, and/or mental health regime. If you're looking for options with respect to mental health, contact SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, at 1-800-662-HELP. That's 1-800-662-4357. The service is open 24/7, 365 days a year, and is a confidential free information service for individuals and family members facing such stressors. Also, if you're feeling suicidal crisis or emotional distress and need to be put in touch with a crisis center, call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. Or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. You can also text the word HOME to 741-741. Those resources are also available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And then the second part of the disclaimer is something I've been talking about for the last 3 months. And I just want to thank again Susan Williams for joining the show on Tuesday to talk about her daughter's battle with multiple sclerosis. But this is a perfect time for me to remind you that the National MS Society is a collective of passionate individuals who want to do something about MS now, to move together towards a world free of multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is comprised of unpredictable and often disabling flare-ups of the central nervous system. Such flare-ups disrupt the flow of information within the brain and between the brain and the body. The National MS Society is the largest private funder of MS researchers in the world, investing more than $1 billion to date. MS stops people from moving, but the National MS Society exists to make sure that MS doesn't. To contact the National MS Society, please call 1-800-344-4867. Again, 1-800-344-4867. Or go to their website at nationalmssociety.org. And on that, let's begin. Last Thursday, we talked about how addiction affects many people around us, our family, our friends. Whether it is our friends and family that are those that are addicted, or ourselves, or both. This week, we're going to talk about what happens when we're dealing with addiction with the people that we work with, or the people that we do business with. Moreover, what professions does that become very prevalent? We'll talk about all of that with our special guest therapist, Ashley Blake. This is The Venture Forward. Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you may be, and welcome to the Venture Forward. I'm John Venturini, a recovering addict of alcoholism, obesity, overeating, and compulsive gambling. And it's an honor and pleasure to have you on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. Last Thursday, we started talking about what addiction means for the people that are around us, whether their sort of heightened sensitivity is to our addiction, or it's our heightened sensitivity to the addiction of the people around us, or both. Last Thursday, I think, resonated with a lot of folks, and I thank you for your questions and comments about that. I think it's something that, in this day and age, mentioning is something that cannot be mentioned since last year. I think it's prevailed more. There are some stats that will be in tonight's presentation that I think are a bit dated. And I will be continuing to check the Department of Labor and other sources to see the veracity of those statistics. My gut says, from someone who's studied statistics and social science for a long time, I think the numbers are a bit low. But we'll talk about it. And we're going to talk about the behaviors that go underneath it. But before we begin and say hello to our special guest, someone who has done the show 5 times now. So that's amazing. And she's amazing. And I can't wait to have her on in moments. But I want to say hi to those that are on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. My comments are being a bit buggy. There's a couple of comments. LT, how are you? Hope you're doing well. He says, hi, Sarah, which makes me think that Sarah is in the room, but I don't have YouTube or Facebook open on that monitor over there, so I can't see. So, hi, LT. Hope you're doing well. Hi, Sarah. Hope you're doing well as well. And sick intro song. It finally worked again. There was a couple of episodes last Tuesday and the Tuesday previous where the intro music did not play. Hipsters hopping, right? The theme song to our program, and I'm glad to hear that back up and running once again, and as much as I am glad to see all of you as well. There is no point for having me have my guest wait. I'm going to bring her on right now. Ashley Blake, it is an honor and pleasure to have you on the program once again. You're muted.
It's a pleasure being here, John. Someone mute me.
Oh, it's mutiny. Isn't it mutiny? I wanted to quickly call out one thing. You have been an incredible help to this program, and I am really thankful and blessed for the amount of time you've spent with the show and providing your expertise and your knowledge. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm glad you're here tonight to talk about this too.
You're welcome. I enjoy being here.
Sarah is actually on. She says, hi, Ashley. Hi, RA. So, addiction. Addiction is something we talk about very much on this show. Whether it is the question of a specific addiction, as far as overeating, obesity, or alcoholism, or compulsive gambling, or any of these sort of peripheral addictions we've talked about on this show, it's around us. I am intrigued on your perspective. Again, and I should intro. Why am I always bad at that? You've had plenty of years of experience in this sort of work, as far as therapy, and also, tell you what, you best describe it, because it's hard to explain it.
I've basically done everything you can in human services in the world of mental health and addiction. And homelessness. We'll add that too, but that combines mental health and addiction as well.
I definitely want to talk more about that as well. It's such an amazing chapter add to your incredible career. And again, it's so great to have you on the show. Addiction. As far as addiction in the workplace, So two questions, two perspectives, right? One, what have you seen with the people that you have treated? And also, what are the sort of phenomenon that you have seen around you in the various jobs that you've had?
So with the people I've treated, there's that issue of do they tell their employer or not that they're struggling with addiction. There's being forced into treatment because an employer realizes they have a problem. Um, and then there's also the struggle that certain industries, for example, construction, have just very high rates of substance use. So if that's somebody's career field and they're in recovery, it can be very difficult.
Not that I think you would know the number off the top of your head, but of the folks that you have done work with, how many of those people tend towards construction and that sort of blue collar work versus other fields?
It's a mix. Definitely more than 50% is more blue collar work, construction, restaurants, hospitality. That's not to say that professionals aren't immune to this. There's very high rates of addiction in the legal field and in the medical field.
I as I alluded to before, I got these statistics that I think have not been adjusted for the thing that we know from last year that we're still going
Mm-hmm.
through. I have a very strong sense that these numbers have probably changed, or these sort of ratios between one profession versus another profession might have changed. And there's one slide that we're going to talk to in minutes that sticks out to me. Like, I don't think that's true anymore. I really don't think that's true anymore. But I want to take it from my perspective in that when you're dealing a lot with, and I'll talk about my past for a second, in the sense that mainly white collar work, information technology, business consulting, that sort of thing. I see addiction by way of that sort of, the sort of addiction that we've talked about on the show, right? We talked about alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about uh, obesity, overeating from the sense of these are things that talk about our consumption and also talks about the pleasure centers of those. Yes, do the gambling, compulsive gambling addictions come up as well? Yeah. So I think, from what I've seen, those addictions, those three, outside of the other addictions that I may not see explicitly, are prevalent. I guess in your perspective and what you've seen and the things that you've done in your career, what sort of addiction types resonate?
I mean, professionally, in the white collar world, it is a lot with alcohol. Um, and actually, statistically speaking, the higher someone's IQ is, the greater the likelihood that they are drinking and drinking heavily. And it's socially acceptable to drink. And in the professional world, there's this expectation of drinking when you're doing fancy dinners and fundraisers and stuff like that. So I think the numbers in white collar world for addiction are skewed because there's that acceptability to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of the sort of major footnote that goes over these stats, as well as what we've talked about previously, as far as the most interesting time we're living in, is that it's also a question of self reporting to a certain degree,
Yeah.
right? And the first step in any 12 step is admitting to it, it's admitting that you have a problem. So those numbers are always going to be somewhat off. It's like the number that I gave in the opening, 23 million, 23.5 million. That number is probably off a bit because, again, that is contingent upon either medical record or self reporting, which, again, there's going to be a skew there. And you could put some sort of population adjustment on it, but it's not going to be exact.
No, and there's plenty of people who don't think they have any sort of problem, unless you sit there in front of them and show them point by point how they meet the criteria for addiction.
Mm. Mm-mm-mm. I think also someone realizing that they have a problem also takes in a huge level of understanding that there might be a problem here. There might be something that's wrong with the way I do things because I have this sort of addiction. And I have a great slide I'll get to in a minute as far as the sort of the 6 key ideas that is sort of synonymous with many addictions. But I'll show you that in a second. Let me actually get over to the tech. Okay. So, and of course, if it's not one thing, it's another thing, right? Okay. So, the thing about continuous stress is that there are so many different other sort of residual effects from it, sort of things that happen because of the stressors that we have. And I think usually when someone, I know in my case, and I'm gonna be selfish for a second and talk about the things that I've observed, in the sense that I know that I've had issues with at least 4 or 5 of those items.
Well, yeah, I mean, continuous stress, which work stress is one of our biggest stressors in life, causes a lot of issues. Those issues, in turn, also increase the likelihood of substance use. So we have substance abuse as an effect of continuous stress, but we can say that some of these other things, so the insomnia, headaches, anxiety, depression, pain,
Mm-hmm.
those also all lend themselves to substance abuse.
Yeah. You think about the just a natural effect of stress and the headache sort of effect, but also when you have all of those, and then you couple that in with any of the specific natures of these addictions, they're all going to have their own sort of twist on this.
Most definitely. And, we can't forget that in our society, we approve of workaholicism, right? And so that obviously increases stress.
A couple of folks joined us. Marilyn, good afternoon to you. Hope you're doing well. And Paul Burke, who's there to remind us that there's always something. I think the reason the depression line in that list resonates to me because I know going through what I'm going through with the demyelination, the second demyelination, and the multiple sclerosis um, diagnosis, there's been a lot of depression attached to that, and it could be just a sort of effect of the lesions that have formed, that a sort of connection between the brain and my body, the central nervous system in my body, but it's also it also talks to the other things that come with the things we do for a living, but also the sort of behaviors we've adapted to.
Oh, yeah. And, when you're somebody with a chronic illness, it becomes hard to separate. Is depression a symptom of the illness, or is the illness causing the depression?
Yeah. Sarah says we encourage and reward work addiction.
We really do. There's this expectation that you work all the time, you don't take your vacation days, and there's very little reward to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's why you find a lot more employers out there that go to alternate sort of either paid time off systems or sick time systems or vacation systems where they're basically saying we basically have to tell our employees and our contractors that they have to take time off, otherwise they're going to burn out, and the burnout could be devastating.
I mean, burnout also leads to addiction as well, right? Because substance use becomes a coping mechanism for the burnout. But, as a society, millions upon millions of dollars are lost to addiction, mental health issues, burnout issues with employees.
Yeah. I think the next thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that there are the six key ideas, right? The six key ideas that are, or ideas rather, that are synonymous with all addictions, whatever the
Mm-hmm.
addiction is, in the sense that the sense of importance, the reward response, the prevalence, the cessation, the disruption, and what happens when there's a reversion, what happens when there's a reverting sort of action.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on those six as far as what you've seen and what you've talked to?
So, as somebody who's not only treated addicts but worked with addicts, both actively using and in recovery, um, you start hearing those things like "can't wait till work's over so I can have a drink."
Mm.
That phrase. A lot of this "I deserve this" sort of phraseology. Um, it is shockingly common in the world of mental health to have therapists, caseworkers, case managers who themselves are struggling with addiction,
Mm.
because the mental health field does not lend itself to good mental health for the employees of mental health.
If you had to put a percentage,
I don't think I could give you an exact percentage because it's something in the field you don't talk about much.
mm-hmm.
You see it. Those who are actually in recovery are usually willing to talk, but there's plenty of people where, you know, at one point I worked at a therapy office that was across the street from a bar. So, you'd see people, in between clients walk over the bar and walk back. And you're just like, we all know what you were doing.
Didn't I just see you? Oh, right. It's funny story. One of my jobs when I was up in Connecticut was right across the street from a very nice hotel, which had a very nice bar. And I mean, I was there 2, 3 times a week, right? But the funny thing is, you usually see the same recurring cast of characters in that bar. And it's not a question of, hey, this is a point where me and my colleagues like to hang out. Now you're saying, well, 6 has become 7, 7 becomes 8, 8 becomes 10 o'clock at night, and I'm still here. And it's 3 nights a week, 4 nights a week. And now it's bordering upon the sense of, okay, there's addiction.
Most definitely. But few recognize that because, especially if you're there with colleagues, it's a work event.
Mm-hmm. A work event that happens multiple times in a given week.
But there's an expectation that you're also there.
Right. Right. I think that's a funny thing that's changed in the last year, is the sense that there's still that sort of hangout, just all virtually. And there are people that are, doing what they used to do, but I think there's sort of an enlarged microscope, sort of an enlarged lens on it now. Like, I know I had a hard time even before all of this, when I wasn't sober, to go on any sort of thing and drink. I didn't want to see myself do it.
And that's a sign right there that you recognize you have a problem if you're not okay with seeing yourself consuming alcohol.
Mm. But then there's also, I think, because of the unique nature of the job I've had for a long time, multiple jobs. So it's not only this job, but the last job I had was mostly a 60, 70 to 30 split of telecommute, in office, whatever. How it was very easy to have that sort of midday libation.
I think that's become a more common occurrence in the last year and change. People are home and nobody knows.
Mm. Mm-mm-mm. I when you don't see people face to face for a while, it becomes very telling, and you kind of just you hope that everything, and you think about them and that everything's okay for them, and they're doing the best they can for themselves, that they're keeping themselves alive, like the old song, Queen song. But you just hope that they're doing the right thing for themselves. I guess the other thing is the fourth thing on that list, what cessation does. So when we halt it, whether it's a question of the drinking or the overeating or the gambling, that sort of effect that cessation gives, that sort of need to go back to that behavior at some point. What have you seen from those that you've worked with or worked for rather? The effects of that cessation.
Well, with those who I worked for who were regularly using, you didn't really get to see any effects of cessation because there was chronic use.
Mm.
When I look at the clients I've treated who are trying to enter recovery, when they're experiencing withdrawal of anything, like withdrawal symptoms can attach themselves to behaviors too, not just substances. That's a sign you have a problem.
Right.
Even something like overeating, when it's you eat the one cookie from the bag, but then you spend 5 hours thinking about all the other cookies in the bag because you just want another cookie, which is really the whole bag of cookies.
Well, the whole bag of cookies, or going to a supermarket where they sell like the tub of cookies.
That's the best thing, and you say it's going to last all weekend, and it lasts an hour.
Yeah, it really becomes a question of how quickly can I turn away from it, and then also how quickly is it going to be for me to get back to it. Mm. There are some cookie manufacturers and places where I purchased cookies. This is not the actual cookies, chocolate chip cookies specifically. That were better than, like, I'm going to buy myself. It sort of goes to that I deserve a drink. Well, I deserve a tub of cookies. Same time.
But you tell yourself that it'll last all week.
It doesn't. Never does.
No.
I'm lucky if it goes one day. Just saying. It's also another reason why I'm like staying as far away as I can from any sort of baked good or cookie or anything, because I know how much that's sort of like kryptonite for me, right? Sort of like the reverse kryptonite, though. It's like you're just consuming more and more of it. But again, if I'm telling these sort of stories, God only knows how many people are experiencing that sort of thing as well, especially when they're in quarantine and doing that sort of thing. So those are the 6 signs that there's addiction. Here's the stats that I think we were gravitating to before, in the sense that over 14% of employed Americans report episodes of heavy drinking.
And I think that number is low.
Oh yeah, me too. I guess the thing I should have put in footnote is, what do we define heavy drinking as?
Well, if we look at what they define binge drinking as, it's depending if you're male or female, 4 to 5 drinks in one sitting. There are plenty of people that 5, 6, 7, 8 drinks is their normal drinking habit, but they don't think they have an issue because they always drink that much.
Well, it becomes a question of tolerance.
Exactly. I remember treating somebody once who drank a case of beer a day. Didn't think he had a problem with that.
And a case of beer has how many? 24 cans?
24.
So a suitcase?
Did not feel he had a problem with substances. He came to me about other issues in his life, not substances.
there were some alcohols that I couldn't deal with at all, and then there were some alcohols that went down really darn easy, which I'm sure is true for anyone who has deemed themselves an alcoholic. The next one is over 30% of employees who report heavy drinking also abuse illicit drugs.
Well, very common, benzodiazepines and opiates, as well as uppers, meth, coke.
Sue says, same thing for smoking. Can't have just one. I had to work through that too, but got that out of my mindset.
Yes, that's a hard one, especially when people have that last pack and they're like, well, I'm just going to smoke the rest of this pack and then I'll quit, except for that's not what happens. You end up buying another pack. And of course, you can't let all those cigarettes go to waste in that pack. And it just kind of repeats.
Everybody has their superstitions about what they do with those, and I'm really fortunate that I never had a problem with cigarette smoking. I did have a. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say that's actually the hardest addiction to break.
I did have a streak of time where I cigar smoked, but I don't touch cigars. I think because of what's going on with the MS, I'm no.
Yeah, not good.
Paul Weber says, "Sir, yes, sir, reporting in from the British contingency. Well, it's good to see you, my friend. Hope you're doing well." Over 60% of individuals know someone who has reported to work under the influence of alcohol or drugs.
I think that statistic's probably true. That's probably the only one on there that is accurate. A majority of us do know somebody who's reported to work under the influence. As an employer, you're stuck with this question of what do you do? Do you fire your employee? Do you try to get them help? What do you do?
Right.
And as a coworker, you have to go, where is my line in this? Do I talk to them? Do I talk to HR? What do I do if I know they are here drunk or high?
It really becomes a question of your human resources department, but also your some places call it a HAP program, a TAP program, but basically
EAPs.
An employee assistance program to provide employees the suitable help they need to beat these sort of addictions, to get themselves that better sense of life. They're very important programs.
They are. Not every company has those. You have to be of a certain size to be required to have them. There's also the issue, too, that there are some companies and some industries where to drink, to use on the job. Food service is a very common one where people often do meth while at work to keep them going. Same thing with factory work and warehouse work with 12-hour shifts.
Sue says, I have away 5 packs to another smoker. He gave away 5 packs to another smoker.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a carton last time I checked was 10 packs? And you can give half the carton away. I think that helps, but I think also the question is, well, I've been outside for coffee break or this or that or other thing, and there's this person that's always there. It's always smoking, and it might have 2, 3, or 4 cigarettes while I'm outside. It's also a sense that there might be a problem. When I say might be, there probably is.
Yeah, but smoking is another one of those ones that's it's becoming less acceptable, except for now we have the rise of vaping, which then in turn is making nicotine addiction more acceptable again.
That's a good point. I mean, I'm curious about that sort of stigma when vaping is a thing, but also, and I'll say this in respect of what New York just passed as far as marijuana use, sort of like what we see in the other states out west and other states across the country. Um, is there some sort of difference in the stigma with someone that's doing, say, CBD or marijuana versus smoking tobacco versus vaping any other random sort of concoction?
I'll say that marijuana and CBD are, at least amongst millennials and younger, considered very much acceptable, not considered to be problematic. Um, you know, smoking in their eyes, very disgusting. These are the kids that grew up with that being thrown at them from a
Right.
very early age. Also, a lot of college campuses have gone completely nicotine free. You know, you can't have cigarettes on campus, so pot then becomes the easy turn to, especially when it's allowed recreationally. And many college towns, even in states where marijuana is not legal, have decriminalized it.
Hmm. Um, Sue says, I didn't pay attention to live streams before this past year, and it interests me to observe when people are clearly impaired and often joking about it.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that comes from a lot of where drinking became acceptable even in regular television. We're talking about Kathy Lee and Hoda when they were still a thing.
Big giant glass.
Big giant glass of wine, right? Well, there we just made it acceptable in the middle of the day to be doing journalism and drinking.
It's was that necessarily the causation that allowed me to put a bottle of bourbon next to the coffee maker? Maybe. Not that I was a fan of Kathy Lee or Hoda, but
No, but it made it more acceptable to drink in the morning.
mm, and the afternoon, and at night, and at 2 a.m. Yeah, it opened the floodgates, didn't it?
Mm-hmm. And I think this past year has eliminated that idea of, waiting till it's 5 o'clock.
Yeah, I mean it's the old song. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. I mean, does it really matter anymore?
No, I don't think it does. People have been kind of hidden away in their homes. Liquor sales are way up.
Mm.
It's become something to do since you can't go do the regular things you want to do.
It's also why a lot of states and commonwealths had to put controls as far as rolling back the sort of last call hours, whether it is the when they break down the sort of restrictions on restaurants and bars, but also the bottle shops or the
Mm-hmm.
wineries or whatnot, liquor stores. Uh,
Uh, the reason the liquor stores reopened in a lot of states quite early on was because alcoholism can kill you. Withdrawal from it can kill you. A lot of people discovered they were alcoholics when suddenly the liquor stores closed and the pandemic started.
mm-hmm.
And that's actually why a lot of states reopened liquor stores, because when all of this started, you also had rehabs and detox facilities drastically cutting their numbers down to prevent outbreaks.
My memory has become a bit faint on this, but I know when they were determining what establishments were going to be closed or open during the red, when we had the red phase
Mm-hmm.
back last year. There was talk that the wine shops, the liquor stores were going to be closed, and then there was such a large outcry that it never made it to being closed.
And the outcry actually came from mental health and substance abuse professionals,
Mm,
because you were going to end up with a lot of dead people on your hands that weren't related to a virus.
mm, mm, mm. It's been a very interesting year, hasn't it?
Indeed, it has.
So, I'm sorry for the eye exam, but the highest levels of reported substance abuse occur among, as we said before, construction workers, food service and accommodation workers, laborers, and machine operators. This is this part of the slide is the part that has me questioning it. The lowest levels of reported substance abuse occur amongst protective service workers, so law enforcement personnel, firefighters, teachers, social service workers, transportation workers. I don't think that's true anymore.
I don't think that's true either. But these are self-report statistics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Police officers aren't going to say they're drinking. They're police officers, right? They'll also say they don't abuse anybody, but they have the highest rates of domestic abuse of any profession.
Right. Right.
Same thing, like, teachers aren't going to admit that they're using substances. But every teacher I know has been rattled by having to do this hybrid schooling and virtual schooling, and every other day it's a different sort of thing.
Mm.
I'm sure their rates of substance use are going way up.
Yeah. Yeah, and I could only imagine the sort of. I heard another statistic which is somewhat related, but I mean, it has to be said that there are a lot of people that are leaving the teaching ranks because of what's taken place.
Very much so, especially in those places where, they said the teachers had to be in person no matter what, and they weren't following any types of social distancing rules and stuff. A lot of teachers retired early or left the profession altogether.
Mm.
So we're facing a massive teaching shortage too.
Mm. Yeah, it's just been a really interesting time, but it has so many social consequences, so to speak, in a sense that a lot of the things that we have grown to trust as being a mainstay has to be rethought.
Most definitely. It's changed for everything for everybody.
Hmm.
And it most certainly has caused our addiction numbers to rise drastically. And we're not going to know the full consequences of that for a while. But we also have the issue that we have a lot of rehabs closing, detox facilities closing, outpatient providers closing. There's a shortage of mental health workers. This is a massive problem.
Sarah has a comment. She says, "Can you speak to this? I'm seeing with legalizing marijuana that people who have been addicts, both in and out of recovery, put it in a different category, especially edibles. What's that about?"
For whatever reason, a lot of people, including those who acknowledge having substance use disorders, do view marijuana differently. I do know in Pennsylvania, where it's legal medically, it's actually legal for opiate use disorder. So basically, it's considered a practical treatment for opiate use.
Hmm.
So basically, the state's saying use marijuana because you're less likely to die. And that's what they're justifying as, so it's addiction substitution.
Mm. It's as much as there have been a couple of people who say, "What do you mean by it?" But I'll throw that term out again. It's that sort of firefighting.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing with marijuana is that it is not physically addictive in the way like opiates are, or benzodiazepines or alcohol is.
Mm.
So there's that to it, but there is a psychological level of addiction to it.
Yeah.
Like there is many other substances, right? Even food. Food addiction is psychological more than anything.
Yeah. And it's very we've discussed before how hard it is to kind of put some sort of treatment towards that. It's so independent based on other factors within the body that it's not the same sort of course, although there are things like Overeaters Anonymous and tracking and bariatric medicine and this and the other thing, but it's not a clear-cut prescribed way of combating that across the board.
Well, I don't think there ever will be because we all have to eat.
Mm-hmm.
It's not actually addressing the food as much as it's addressing the reasons behind the food.
Right. Right.
But eating disorders are probably one of the hardest things in mental health to treat because we all have to eat.
Yeah, we need to in order to live, in order to survive. It's just as important as breathing and drinking water, right?
Exactly.
I think I had one more slide, but then again, knowing my memory these days, it probably isn't true. No, that was it. That's the doc. Um, yeah, I think when we look at addiction, not only from our own eyes, which we obviously know about that, and what we can do to try to, one, admit that we have an issue with it, have a problem, but then two, trying to figure out exactly the best way to combat it. Go, not to go through a 12-step primer here, but making amends and all that too. I mean, we'll spend an episode or 500 on the 12 steps, but that sort of self sort of realization and self sort of combating is one thing. The second thing, though, is when it's happening to other people, that is either your livelihood or another's livelihood, and it happens in the professional landscape, there is such a higher order of importance, not importance necessarily, but I guess stakes. There's a lot more things that are riding. There are a lot of other factors that are at play, a lot of other parties that are at play.
Well, yeah, it's not just the livelihood of the person struggling with their use, but it's also the company's livelihood, right?
Mm-hmm.
The money spent, the missed days because of being hungover or being in withdrawal, um, and also the higher risk of injury and on the job accidents. When we talk about something like machine operators and construction workers having these very high rates of substance use, it makes you wonder then when you hear somebody fell off a roof, did they slip?
Right.
Or were they drunk? Or were they high?
Right. I mean, what was
you really don't know.
Yeah. What were the mitigating circumstances that caused it? It's just it's so eye opening to realize that we are far from. I think when there's nothing else going on and there's such a heightened level of not necessarily scrutiny, but a heightened lens on what others are doing, because we're all dealing with this sort of, I hate using this term, but this new normal. It's amazing to see all this for what it's worth and really taking that into consideration.
Yeah, you have to. And as our society is changing and adapting and probably will not go back to exactly the way it was, we have to take a real hard look at how addiction is affecting the workforce.
Yeah. Yeah, without question. Go back to over this. I think outside of the things we presented, what other facets, what other things that you find are important when you deal with, addiction in the workplace or addiction amongst coworkers or addiction in the work setting?
I think being able to recognize what is addiction, but also having the courage to speak up. And that can be hard, especially if it's like a boss who's using. And I've been in that situation before where, my direct supervisor was using substances on the job, but it was in a culture where it was accepted, unfortunately. And it's trying to figure out where do you turn with that one. Because they were putting other people's lives at stake in the process.
Yeah, it's really it becomes a very sensitive and fragile situation, especially when the person you report into is drinking a lot or whatever. I can understand that big time.
Yeah. So, being able to recognize it and also take care of yourself in those situations too. That's important. So don't feed into someone's addiction.
Yeah. There's such an interdependency between the two.
Exactly. So if you think your coworker has a drinking problem and they invite you out to happy hour, say no.
Yeah. Well, I think between talking about what our role in our addiction amongst our friends and family is, but also the people we work with, it gives us that sort of giant scope of how that sort of behavior works between both of those worlds.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for your perspective on this for sure. I actually I have a question because you know there have been plenty of times you've done this show. You've done this 5 times now. I almost feel like I would be remiss not to ask you whether or not you would like to do a show once a week.
I could do that.
Well, I think we should come up with a time slot and everything because I think you're fantastic at this. There's
Well, thank you.
a lot of the venture audience that really enjoys your work, and I'm so glad that you're able to have done these 5 shows. But I'm also really glad that you provide your insight on a lot of these things. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I enjoy doing this.
Well, it's been an honor and pleasure to have you on, and I look forward to that next project.
Okay.
You have a great night. Thank you again. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Ashley. She is an incredible guest. I am really thankful for all the work she's done on this show, and just a really great treasure trove worth of knowledge. Has so many great perspectives on these things. So it's been great to have her on this show, and I'm looking forward to starting that new project with her really soon. We'll come up with dates and times on when that's going to start, but it'll be soon for sure. Sue says, "Thank you both. Thank you, Sue, for watching, as well as all of you. Thank you for liking, subscribing, all of that, because you guys really make this show so important for me to do, but also important for me to tell my story, which is basically a segue. Tomorrow, VF Talks as always. Tuesday is March 31st. It is the day before there is a workshop project that has changed many people's lives that watch this show, and that of Lita. We're going to talk about the things that made me start live streaming, the things that made me start talking about this story, the sort of cathartic nature of that, but also the very important life lessons that I've learned through live streaming. We're going to talk about that on Tuesday. Livestreamingpros.com. I don't have a graphic for it, but we will talk about it at length tomorrow and on Tuesday. It's a great program. Lita, live every day in April. And please, as Sarah's alluded to, don't forget to hit the like button. Don't like, comment, subscribe. You want to buy Rex a coffee? Please buy Rex a coffee. He's always pestering me for more caffeine. Marilyn says, "Welcome aboard, Ashley. You are a permanent fixture now." Yes, welcome aboard indeed. And Marilyn says, "Thank you. It's always enjoyable." Marilyn, it's always enjoyable to have you watching the show too. So VF Talks is tomorrow night, 5:15 Eastern, 2:15 Pacific. And then Tuesday, we'll talk about why I'm live streaming and why I'm telling my story. That'll be Tuesday night, 6:30 Eastern, 3:30 Pacific. And on that, I'm going to say the same thing I say at the end of every single Venture Forward, every single VF Talks. Stay safe, stay sane, stay strong, stay sober. You're worth it. Have a great night. I will see you tomorrow night at 5:15 Eastern. Good night.